Hello everyone, this is Doug, and in this lesson we're going to start to talk about the different representations of organic molecules. Because organic molecules can really vary in their structures and size, we represent them differently in different situations. And in this theory we'll talk about the molecular formulas, Lewis structures, and condensed structural formulas. And in the second video, part 2, we'll focus a lot on the line bond drawing, or that skeletal zigzag drawing that you've probably seen before. So let's start with molecular formulas. Right, these are just tell you the types of atoms that there are and how many there are of each. It's not a lot of information, but and they can be very vague, and I'll show you an example in a second. But it's super quick to write big molecules. So as an example, right, everyone's seen water, good old H2O, or maybe methane, CH4, or maybe something like ethanol, C2H6O, things like that. My students always give me examples of like C6H12O6. Right, and call it glucose and stuff. But again, the idea here is that it just tells you how many of each element there is. And that's really all the information that's there, right? So if I look at this one, for example, probably this is ethanol. I mean, that's what I was thinking, but we don't really know unless we draw it out, and we'll draw it out in a second here. But what this is telling me is that there are, right, all it tells me is that whatever this is, that there are 2 carbon atoms, that there are 6 hydrogens, right, 6 hydrogen atoms, and that there is 1 oxygen. 1 oxygen atom. That's all it's telling me. It's not necessarily the identity. For small things like water and methane, yes, it's the identity, but not necessarily for big things. Like, so for example, when students give me C6H12O6, they're always like, ooh, this is the formula for glucose. Which it is the formula for glucose, but it's the formula for lots of other things too. In addition to being glucose, it's also the formula for fructose. It's also the formula for galactose. It's also the formula for allose. For all of these, and these are just sugars. These are just sugars that I'm thinking of. There are so many molecules I could draw that have 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. So many. And so this is not super informative. I don't know which one of these you're talking about if you tell me C6H12O6. It's pretty vague. That's what I meant by it. It's pretty vague. But it is much faster. It's way faster than drawing out glucose or fructose to try to describe the molecules. So you'll see these. These are easy to use if you want to find like a formula weight of something, right, or a molecular mass, some sort of molar mass. So, but there's just not that much information in a molecular formula. Lewis structures, on the other hand, are different. Lewis structures do have lots of information on them, right? So you draw out all the bonds, all the atoms, and all of the lone pairs to draw Lewis structures. So it's a very, very informational, very specific, but it can be time-consuming, right? So for example, if we do take that little one up there, so that C2H6O, and I asked you to draw it, right? So here's the molecular formula. I want you to draw the Lewis structures. So draw the Lewis structures. Now we want to put these all together, right? So looks like I've got 2 carbons. They've each got 4 valence electrons. I've got 6 hydrogens. They each have 1. And a 6th. And I've got an oxygen with 6 valence electrons. So I know my carbons then are going to each have 4 bonds. My hydrogens should each have 1. My oxygen atom should have 6. So why don't you pause this video, take a second, see if you can get this to all fit together. It's going to be the right answer as long as all those carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens have the right number of bonds according to how many valence electrons they have in their Lewis dot structure. And as long as you have the right number of carbons and hydrogens and oxygens, then you're going to be set. So hit pause, take 1 sec, see what you can do. So hopefully you actually tried instead of just watching me do everything. So you could have done this in one of 2 ways, probably. You could have put the 2 carbons together and have your oxygen on the end. But then that leaves all of these electrons that still need hydrogens, right? So I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hydrogens. I've got 6 spots left to fill with hydrogens. So I've got an H, H, H. And then I just fill the whole thing with those hydrogens to give me this molecule. So that'd be 1 possible Lewis structure. But I didn't have to put the oxygen at the end. It could very well have been in the middle. And then that leaves just my carbons that need more bonds, and so I put my hydrogens there instead. So no hydrogen on oxygen this time. And I think these are the only two ways that you could draw Lewis structures for this molecule. But now the thing here is that, yes, these have the same formulas as one another, but they are not the same molecule because they do not have the same connections, right? Here you have carbon-carbon, then oxygen. Here you have carbon-oxygen-carbon. These are different molecules. This molecule over here is ethanol, like that drinking alcohol in wine and beer, versus a dimethyl ether. So dimethyl ether. Very, very different molecules. Ethanol, for example, is a liquid. Dimethyl ether is a gas at room temperature and pressure. Both are fairly toxic, but they're different molecules. They're different things. They have different functional groups. If you learn about functional groups a little bit later, you'll see one has an alcohol, one has an ether. They're different, though. They have the same formula, right? They have the same formula, but they're different structures. They're different things. So by drawing the Lewis structures, we're able to figure out what thing it is you're talking about. So just saying C2H6O is not enough information. Drawing it out, though, I can see the difference. I know if you're talking about ethanol or I know if you're talking about dimethyl ether because you drew it out for me and I can see it. Now, I don't expect you guys, my students, to like just look at a molecule and be like, oh, that's ethanol, that's dimethyl ether. But I want you to be able to see that they're different, and I want you to be able to use this vocabulary, which is that when two things have the same formulas, so same formula, but different attachments, that's what we call an isomer. So these two molecules would be isomers because they have the same formula, but they are attached differently. They're assembled in a different way. An isomer, just coming from, right, iso meaning the same, like an isosceles triangle has all same sides, and mer meaning like part or piece. So the word isomer means like same parts, which it does have the same parts, right? They each have their same number of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens. So a Lewis structure gives us a lot more information, but as you can imagine, it's going to take a little bit more time to draw it out than to just write C2H6O. Which brings us to our third representation type, which is the condensed structural formula. And I've already pre-drawn a lot of these things because you can imagine it would have taken a while for me to just draw these in front of you and you just be watching me draw C's and H's for a minute. But what the condensed structural formula does is it describes the atoms in each chunk of the molecule in their order of attachment. So it's supposed to give you a lot of information like all of these, right? Here's all your Lewis structures. These are all Lewis structures drawn out. And let me write that, right? So these are all your Lewis structures. And what we're saying here is when we're talking about chunking, right, each chunk, what I'm talking about each chunk is I'm basically just separating the middle pieces. So separate the middle pieces. Separate the middle pieces, so versus the end pieces, right? End pieces would be like halogens or hydrogens. Middle pieces would be anything that can have more than one bond, basically. So if I was to look at this first molecule on top left here, I see a CH bond here. I'm not going to separate that because H is not an end piece, but then I have a CC, so I am going to separate that. And then I have another CC piece. I'm going to separate that. Another CC, separate that. CO, separate that. But OH, I'm not going to separate because the H is not a middle piece. It's an end piece. So if I chunk it up like this, here are the different pieces that I get. Now, what we're saying is that for the condensed structural formula, what you do, right, is you write the atoms that are in each chunk. So I'm looking at this and I see my first chunk here. It has a carbon and it has 3 hydrogens. My next chunk has a carbon and 2 hydrogens. My next chunk has a carbon and 2 hydrogens. My next chunk has a carbon and 2 hydrogens. And then lastly, I have an O and an H. And this is my condensed structural formula. So condensed structural formula. And what's nice about the condensed structural formula, right, it has more information than just a molecular formula, right? The molecular formula for this would be something like, this would just be C4H5678910O. That would be the molecular formula for this. That doesn't give me nearly as much information as the condensed structural formula does, because if I just had you draw C4H10O, there's so many different isomers you could draw for that. There are many different ways you can combine four carbons together with an oxygen. You could put the oxygen in the middle, you could put the carbons branching off somewhere, all kinds of different things. So what's nice about the condensed structural formula is that it gives you a little bit more information because it tells you what's attached to what. Like I know, for example, that there's an OH at the end of this. There's no O in the middle, because if there was an O in the middle, I would have drawn an O in the middle. And so the condensed structural formula is faster than a Lewis structure, drawing out all the bonds, but it gives more information than just a molecular formula. So it's kind of in between, right? So it's a condensed version of a Lewis structure is the idea. Let me do a couple more examples here. Same thing with this one, bottom left. Separate my middle pieces. Looks like I've got 3 separations to do here. And if I do the same thing, right, my first chunk has a carbon with 3 hydrogens. I have a carbon with simply 1 hydrogen, a carbon with 1 hydrogen, and a carbon with 3 hydrogens. And that is a perfectly fine way to draw a condensed structural formula. That works great. What you may see some places, it's not required, but you certainly can do it, is sometimes people will put the CC double bond in there. So you'll see that alkene in there drawn out there. Both are okay. Both are great. Both are fine. So both are correct. One's not better than the other one. If I go up to my top right one, it looks like I have, well, let me draw out the chunks for you again. So middle piece, middle piece, middle piece, middle piece. And then again, I'm just going to draw out what's in each chunk. So here I have an NH2. And again, I'm going to write this in order of attachment. So I have 2 hydrogens attached to a nitrogen. I have a carbon with 2 hydrogens on it. Now here I have a carbon with an H and a bromine on it. So I just write them like that. And then I have another CH2. Here I just have a C and an O and a CH3. And that would be the condensed structural formula for that molecule. And then lastly, I have this honker, this fatty acid molecule. It has 10 carbons. This would be a relatively small fatty acid. But if I write this out, it's going to take forever, right? Because I've got a CH3, CH2, 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 and I'm just going to keep going and going and going and going until I get to this last part, which you can write one of 2 ways, so I don't really care which way. So middle piece, middle piece. You can write this as just the CO and then the OH. That works. That's a fine way to write a carboxyl. Or sometimes you'll see these written out as CO2H. Either one is fine, but you'll see them both. Now, with this really, really long one, what you can do and what you'll see in textbooks and online and everything is that if you have something that repeats over and over and over and over again, you can just kind of combine them. You can just condense them up. So what do I mean by that? If you have all these CH2s, you don't have to write all of them out. You can just put brackets around them and say how many there are. So it looks to me like I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 CH2s. So another way to write this is to say that I've got the CH3, and I definitely have CH2s, but I don't want to write them all, so I'm going to say that there's 8 of them, and then write my COOH. And so you've sort of condensed an already condensed structural formula. That's totally fine too. Both of these are also correct. So those are both fine. You'll see them both. So that's how you do the molecular formula for something. The Lewis structure is the most work. It draws out everything. But then the condensed structural formula is real common, again, in textbooks and online because it's a way to type out a molecule. It gives you way more information, though. Tells you what is attached to what, which is much more powerful than the molecular formula. What we're going to do in the next video, just to give you a little like preview here, is the line bond drawing. So that all of this was kind of more work than I would like to do as an organic chemist. I'd much rather draw this molecule on the bottom left, for example, as simply this. So I just zigzag and a double bond. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here's how I draw the bottom right-hand one. Up here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And draw a double bond there. Looks like I have a bromine sticking off here and a nitrogen with 2 hydrogens. So what we're going to do in the next video is talk about how to do those zigzag drawings, those skeletal drawings. That's the next piece. So if you have any questions or comments down below, please go ahead and post them. And good luck. Practice this stuff and come watch the next video in a second.